ever get that feeling like, you're only seeing one side of the story?
Yeah.
That's kind of what we're diving into today.
Okay.
It's the whole world of selective reporting.
Right.
We've got these two pieces, the art of selective reporting and the dangerous game of selective reporting. And it seems like both are saying we need to be like extra careful about what we're reading.
Yeah, what's really interesting here is that it's not even just about outright lies.
Yep.
It's more about how the information is chosen and presented.
Okay.
You can think of it almost like a magician's trick.
Right.
They're not breaking the laws of physics, but they're expertly directing your attention.
Right.
To create an illusion.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So how does this magic trick work in the media?
Well, one way is through framing.
Okay.
Like, imagine two articles covering the same protest. But one calls it a riot and the other calls it a demonstration.
Oh, yeah.
Same event, but totally different perception.
Right, the words used can completely change how we see things.
Exactly, and that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Okay.
These sources really dive into how techniques, like emphasizing certain statistics, using emotionally charged language,
Yeah.
and even strategically omitting facts that don't fit the narrative,
Yeah.
all contribute to a skewed perspective.
So it's not just about what's being said, but how it's being said.
Exactly.
What about the why behind all of this?
Right.
Why would media outlets go through all this trouble?
Well, one thing that both these pieces suggest is that it's not necessarily some big conspiracy.
Okay.
It might just be, the pressures of the modern media landscape, with social media and the 24/7 news cycle.
Right.
These outlets are constantly competing for clicks and eyeballs.
Oh, for sure.
And sensationalized stories, good guy versus bad guy, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Those grab more attention.
Makes sense, but it also feels like there are maybe some deeper forces at play, too.
Yeah, both sources definitely hint at that.
Okay.
They suggest that a lot of media outlets rely on, a very small pool of experts
Okay.
and commentators.
Yeah.
And that can lead to kind of an echo chamber effect,
Interesting.
where certain viewpoints get amplified and others are marginalized.
So not necessarily intentional bias,
Right.
but just like a lack of diverse voices.
Yeah, exactly. And that lack of diversity can have a real impact on how stories are framed and presented.
I'm starting to see how this selective reporting thing can be pretty dangerous. Is that what these articles are getting at?
Yeah, one of the biggest concerns they raise is how it can erode public trust in the media.
Right.
If people feel like they're constantly being manipulated
Yeah.
or only getting part of the story, they're going to start tuning out
Absolutely.
and looking for information elsewhere.
And that's where things get really tricky, right?
Right.
Because if people don't trust traditional media,
Yeah,
they might turn to sources that are even less reliable.
exactly. It creates a vicious cycle where distrust feeds into misinformation. And it becomes really hard for people to discern fact from fiction.
So we're talking at a potential crisis of information here.
Both articles seem to think so. They argue that this trend of selective reporting could have consequences
Yeah.
for everything from public discourse
Okay.
to even democratic decision-making.
Okay, this is getting heavy. It sounds like this selective reporting can do some real damage.
Yeah, one of the most disturbing consequences that they highlight is the silencing of dissenting voices.
What do you mean?
People who challenge the prevailing narrative.
Yeah.
Even if they have valid points,
Right.
are often dismissed, ridiculed, or even ostracized.
So it's not just about shaping the story.
Right.
It's about actively shutting down any alternative viewpoints.
That's a key point both sources are making.
Wow.
They argue that this suppression of dissent can stifle open debate
Okay.
and prevent us from having, those difficult but necessary conversations
Yeah.
about complex issues.
I'm starting to see how this whole selective reporting thing is about much more than just, a few biased news stories.
Right.
It seems like it has the potential to really undermine our ability to think critically
Exactly.
and engage in meaningful dialogue.
That's exactly what these pieces are warning us about.
Okay, so we've established that this is a serious problem, but what can we as individuals actually do about it?
Well, that's what we'll delve into next. These articles aren't all doom and gloom.
Okay, good.
They offer some really practical advice on how to become more discerning consumers of information.
Okay.
And that's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive.
All right, so we're in this world of selective reporting.
Yeah.
Maybe even an information crisis, as you put it.
Mm.
What do we do about it?
Right.
The articles mention some advice.
Now, the first thing is simple, but it's powerful.
Okay.
Question everything.
Okay.
Don't just accept a headline or a soundbite at face value. Ask yourself, like, who benefits from this particular story being told this way?
It's like being a detective, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Looking for clues and motives.
Exactly. And one big clue is to look at the language being used.
Okay.
Are there a lot of loaded words, designed to trigger an emotional response?
Right.
Is the tone really dramatic or sensationalized?
Now that you mention it,
Yeah.
I've noticed that some of the news stories that made me the most, angry or anxious are the ones that use the most extreme language. It's like they're trying to push my buttons.
That's a classic technique.
Yeah.
And once you start noticing those patterns, you become more aware of how you're being manipulated.
Okay, so step 1, be a critical reader.
Right.
Not just a passive consumer.
Mm-hmm.
What else?
The next step is to diversify your information diet.
Okay.
So don't just rely on one news source,
Okay.
no matter how much you trust them.
Right.
Seek out different perspectives, even ones that you might initially disagree with.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like you wouldn't eat one type of food every day, right?
Exactly.
You need a balanced diet to stay healthy.
Exactly. And your information diet is no different.
I like that.
Yeah.
So expose yourself to a variety of viewpoints to get a more well-rounded understanding of the issue.
Yeah.
Okay, but with so much information out there, how do I even know where to start?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Are there tips on finding reliable sources?
One of the articles had a good point about this.
Okay.
They said to look for sources that have a good track record of accuracy and fact-checking.
Mm-hmm.
Also, pay attention to whether they're clearly distinguishing between news reporting and opinion pieces.
That's helpful. And are there any red flags to watch out for?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like signs that a source might not be reliable?
Look for sources that consistently present one-sided arguments or rely heavily on anonymous sources or even use a lot of inflammatory language.
Okay.
And be wary of websites or social media accounts that have a very clear political agenda or are trying to sell you something.
It's almost like they're saying, trust your gut. If something feels off or too good to be true, it probably is.
That's a good rule of thumb, but don't just rely on your intuition.
Okay.
Do a little digging.
Right.
See if other reputable sources are reporting the same story.
Okay.
And how they're framing it.
So it's like being a journalist ourselves, doing our own fact-checking and research.
In a way, yeah.
Wow.
And it's not as hard as it sounds.
Okay.
A quick Google search can often reveal whether a source has a history of bias or inaccuracy.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about questioning everything and diversifying our sources.
Right.
Is there anything else we can do to combat this selective reporting?
Yeah, one of the most important things, and maybe the hardest,
Okay.
is to be open to changing your mind. We all have our biases and preconceived notions.
Right.
But if we're constantly filtering information through those lenses, we're never going to get the full picture.
You're saying we need to be willing to admit when we're wrong.
Exactly. And it's not about, being wishy-washy or abandoning your values.
Yeah.
It's about having the intellectual humility to say, okay, maybe there's something to what this other side is saying.
That's a really important point.
Yeah.
But it's also incredibly challenging.
It is tough.
It's human nature to want to be right,
Right.
And surround yourself with people who agree with you.
Yeah, exactly.
It's comfortable.
It is.
But you're saying it's worth it.
It's incredibly rewarding.
Okay.
When you're willing to step outside your comfort zone and engage with different perspectives, you open yourself up to new ideas and ways of thinking.
I like that.
Yeah.
Instead of seeing disagreement as like a threat, we can see it as an opportunity to learn and grow.
That's the spirit.
Yeah.
And remember, changing your mind doesn't mean you're weak or indecisive.
Okay.
It shows that you're thoughtful and open-minded.
This is great advice, but I have to admit, it feels a little overwhelming.
Yeah.
Where do we even begin to put all of this into practice?
Well, it starts with small steps.
Okay.
Maybe pick one news story that you feel really strongly about and try to find sources that present the opposite viewpoint.
Okay.
And don't just read them to dismiss them.
Right.
Really try to understand where they're coming from.
I can try that.
Yeah.
But what about those everyday conversations,
Yeah.
The ones that happen around the dinner table or on social media?
Right.
How do we navigate those? when we're constantly bombarded with selective information.
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
And that's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
You brought up those everyday conversations,
Right.
the ones that happen at the dinner table
Right.
or online. It feels like that's where things can get really heated,
For sure.
especially when everyone's coming in with their own version of the facts,
It's like trying to have a conversation in multiple languages at the same time.
Yeah.
Everybody's talking, but nobody's really understanding each other.
And both these articles seem to suggest that, selective reporting plays a big role in that.
Yeah, they really make the point that when we're constantly exposed to information that just confirms our existing beliefs,
Right.
we become less likely to question those beliefs.
Yeah.
Or even consider, alternative viewpoints.
Right.
It's like we build up these mental walls that prevent us from seeing the world through anyone else's eyes.
And those walls can be pretty tough to break down,
Oh, yeah.
especially when they're reinforced by algorithms and echo chambers online.
Yeah. One of the articles had a great analogy for this.
Okay.
They described it as being trapped in a filter bubble,
Okay.
where you're only exposed to information that aligns with your existing preferences
Right.
and biases.
It's like living in a world where everyone agrees with you all the time, which might sound nice at first,
Right.
but it ultimately prevents us from having those challenging and necessary conversations that help us grow and learn.
For sure.
So how do we break out of those bubbles?
Right?
Is it even possible?
Yeah, well, the first step is awareness.
Okay.
Just recognizing that these filter bubbles exist
Mm-hmm.
and that we're all susceptible to them
Right.
is huge.
So being more mindful of the information we're consuming and the sources we're trusting.
Exactly. And once you're aware of your own biases
Yeah.
and that potential for selective reporting,
Right.
you can start to take steps to kind of mitigate those effects.
Okay, but let's get practical. What does that actually look like in those everyday conversations?
Yeah.
When you're talking to a friend or a family member
Right.
who's clearly been influenced by selective reporting, how do you deal with that?
That's where things get really tricky. And both these articles really emphasize that there's no easy solution here.
Okay.
But they do offer some really valuable advice
Right.
on how to navigate those difficult conversations
Okay.
in a way that's both productive and respectful.
Give me the goods. What's the secret?
Well, one of the key takeaways is to focus on listening
Okay.
rather than lecturing.
Mm.
It's really tempting to try to correct someone's misinformation
Right.
or just bombard them with facts and figures
Yeah, for sure.
that support your viewpoint, but that often backfires
Oh, yeah.
because it just puts people on the defensive,
Right.
and then they're less likely to actually listen to what you have to say.
So instead of going in with guns blazing,
Right.
maybe try to understand where they're coming from.
Exactly.
Why they believe what they believe.
Ask questions, listen to their responses,
Mm-hmm.
and try to find some common ground.
Okay.
You might be surprised at how much you can learn from someone,
Yeah.
even if you disagree with them on the issue at hand.
It's almost like turning the conversation into a learning opportunity.
Right.
Rather than a battle to be won.
Exactly. And remember, you're not always going to change someone's mind.
Right.
And that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
The goal is to just have a respectful exchange of ideas,
Yeah.
even if you walk away with both of your perspectives unchanged.
I think that's a really important point.
Yeah.
It's not about winning or losing.
Right.
It's about having those difficult conversations in a way that's both honest and compassionate.
And one of the articles had a really interesting suggestion for how to do that.
Okay.
They said to focus on shared values
Okay.
rather than just divisive issues.
What do you mean by that?
Well, let's say you're talking to someone who has very different political views than you.
Right.
Instead of jumping straight into a debate about policy,
Yeah.
try to find common ground on the underlying values.
Oh, okay.
Maybe you both agree that education is important
Right.
or that everyone deserves access to health care. Starting with those shared values can create a more positive and productive foundation for the conversation.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
It's like finding that bridge that connects us,
Yeah.
even if we're standing on opposite sides of the river.
Exactly. And once you've established that connection,
Yeah.
it becomes easier to have those tougher conversations
Right.
about the issues that divide us.
So it's not about ignoring those differences, but about approaching them from a place of understanding and respect.
Exactly.
I see.
And remember, these conversations take time and patience.
Yeah.
You're not going to dismantle someone's entire belief system in one sitting.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Precisely. And sometimes the best way to influence someone
Okay.
is to simply model the behavior you want to see.
Oh, interesting.
Be open to hearing different perspectives. Admit when you're wrong.
Yeah.
And be willing to change your own mind.
Right.
Those actions often speak louder than any argument you could make.
This has been an incredible deep dive.
Yeah.
I feel like I've learned so much about the dangers of selective reporting and the importance of critical thinking.
For sure.
But I also feel a sense of, like, hope.
Yeah.
Knowing that we have the power to become more discerning consumers of information.
Right.
And to foster more productive and respectful conversations.
Absolutely.
Even with those who disagree with us.
I think that's the perfect takeaway.
Yeah.
It's easy to feel really overwhelmed
Oh, yeah.
by the information overload.
For sure.
And the divisive rhetoric that surrounds us.
Right.
But remember, we're not powerless. We have the ability to choose how we consume information, how we engage with others,
Right.
and ultimately how we shape the world around us.
So the next time you're scrolling through your news feed or having a conversation about current events,
Yeah.
remember what we've talked about today. Question everything. Seek out diverse perspectives.
Right.
Listen with an open mind and be willing to change your mind.
Those are the tools that will empower you to become an informed and engaged citizen who can navigate this crazy information landscape.
Right.
And contribute to, a more truthful and nuanced public discourse.
And that's what the deep dive is all about.
Exactly.
Helping you become a more informed and discerning thinker so you can make sense of the world around you.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this journey, and keep those critical thinking caps on.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.